Daniel Carter, 35 years old, is a freelance photographer living in Seattle, Washington. He built his career from nothing, from simple wedding shoots to major wildlife assignments. His photographs have appeared in Nature's Wonders magazine, earning Daniel enough to support himself and excels at, yet for his in-laws, especially his mother-in-law Catherine and his father-in-law Victor, it never seems good enough. Every Sunday dinner, Victor, a high-profile bank executive, always finds fault with Daniel. Photography is just a hobby, not a real career, he'd say, speaking like someone who only trusts numbers and stocks. Catherine was more tactful. She would praise Daniel's work but never failed to ask, "When will you settle down with a steady, salaried job?" Her kind words, laced with condescension, often left Daniel speechless as he strove not to upset his wife, Haley. Haley loved him dearly, gently squeezing his hand under the table as if to apologize on behalf of her family. Recently, Daniel had just returned from a trip in Montana, braving freezing temperatures to capture bison crashing through the snow. He came home with frostbitten cheeks and spent days only thinking about Catherine's upcoming birthday dinner. Haley reassured him, "In just a few hours, we'll be with your family. Mom will be so happy," but Daniel felt a chill deep in his chest. There was something in Catherine's eyes that put him immediately on guard. As he stepped into the kitchen to help bring out a glass of wine, he noticed Catherine holding two glasses, one set aside. She whispered, "I poured this special margarita just for my husband Daniel." Her slight smile betrayed a hint of avoidance in her gaze. Unintentionally, Daniel's mind replayed last weekend when Catherine asked Haley, "Are you planning to have children yet? Little ones are expensive, so your husband needs a stable job first." Haley just stayed silent. Perhaps behind Catherine's middle-aged beauty lay an ambition for her daughter to marry someone of higher caliber. Daniel didn't know how to react, but he politely took the wine glass. As he brought it to his lips, he detected a strange, sour tang, nothing like the wine he usually enjoyed when dining with his wife. Suddenly, his throat felt on fire, and he discreetly swapped glasses with Catherine's husband, someone who had often mocked his work. Although Victor had belittled Daniel's profession many times, Daniel never showed any reaction. Yet this time, he sensed something was terribly wrong when Catherine handed him that glass. The rest of the dinner proceeded normally, laughter, dishes clinking, but Daniel only took a few sips of beer before setting his glass down. It felt as though something was happening that he couldn't ignore. The odd odor of that drink made his heart pound and his body grow cold, but he forced a smile at Haley, as though to promise her, "I'm okay." She whispered, "Are you all right?" He hesitated, then smiled. "I'm just thirsty." Haley nodded, her concern evident in her eyes, but she didn't press further. About 45 minutes later, Daniel woke up from a strange dream, images of years spent living behind a camera, admiring looks as he enlarged scenes of wilderness into life. All of it vanished when he felt a choking sensation around his throat. In that chaotic dream, he saw photographs that should have been taken, incredible moments stolen. He sprang awake, glancing around to find himself sitting in the living room on a lounge chair. Sweat drenched his shirt, his lips were parched, and in his hand was still the glass he had when he thought he had set down when he went to help Catherine in the kitchen. Daniel swallowed hard and stood. "I'm feeling a little lightheaded," he muttered, trying not to worry anyone. Haley rushed to his side, tending to him carefully. Catherine feigned concern. "Maybe it's because you were out in the cold so long." Victor quietly observed his daughter-in-law and son-in-law bustling around. "Yeah, you've been up in the mountains so much, your body just needs to readjust," he said cheerfully. Daniel startled. Victor was drinking from what he suspected was that same peculiar wine, yet he seemed perfectly fine, chatting away. If poison had really been in that drink, why wasn't Victor affected? Or had Catherine only intended to target him? A whirlwind of pressure and confusion hit Daniel. Did Catherine merely want to ruin his future, or was she actually trying to harm him? His heart tightened as the living room's faint yellow light caught his gaze, and he looked directly at Catherine. Her eyes betrayed a hidden darkness. In that stormy moment, Daniel stepped back, anger flaring. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. Catherine, flustered, stammered, "It's nothing, you're fine." But her hesitant eyes couldn't conceal the truth. Haley rushed over, voice trembling. "Mom, you went too far." Catherine hurriedly embraced her daughter, though her hand trembled uncontrollably. Daniel's heart shattered as he watched his wife cling to her mother, torn between confusion and fury. "Since when have you been trying to harm my husband?" Haley's voice broke, sobbing. Victor, usually silent, stepped forward, voice cold. "This was wrong. Catherine, you were warned about the man our daughter chose." Daniel, though shaking, suppressed the urge to shout. He knew that losing his temper now would only hurt Haley more. That night, Daniel and Haley left her parents' house. On the drive home, Haley rested her head on his shoulder, tears streaming. "I'm sorry I hid it for so long. Let Mom sow doubt in your heart," she whispered. Daniel gently stroked her hair, voice soft. "It's not your fault. It's all on them. But now you know. We'll get through this." Over the following days, Daniel replayed every detail, writing in a journal. Catherine setting aside 2 separate glasses, her odd glance whenever he turned away, Victor's sighs whenever steady work was mentioned. Inside him, a flame of rage burned, but it also fueled his determination not to let anyone decide his fate. Eventually, Daniel confronted his in-laws head-on. One peaceful Sunday afternoon, the whole family gathered around the dining table as golden sunlight streamed through the windows. Daniel spoke, calm but firm. "I know everything you did, Mom. I know you intended to harm me." The room fell into a stunned silence. Haley burst into tears, Victor's brow furrowed, and Catherine paled. Daniel remained composed. He had chosen his words carefully. "I never imagined the woman I respect could do something like that. But it ends here. Haley deserves a happy family, not a stage of lies." Catherine was silent for several long seconds before stammering, "Daniel, I only wanted to protect our children." Daniel shook his head. "Protect, yes, but by spreading fear and hatred? You can't continue like this." Haley looked at her husband, tears in her eyes, but determination shining bright. "Mom, I want you to understand that my love for Daniel isn't something to be challenged. He and I will build our happiness our own way." In the end, Daniel and Haley decided to move out and live on their own. They rented a small apartment by the shore of Lake Union, where Daniel could continue photographing nature amidst the cityscape. At first, Catherine and Victor were furious, but as they witnessed their daughter and son-in-law thriving independently and happily, their pride gradually melted away. Occasionally, Catherine visited with a box of pastries, never again offering poisoned drinks. She offered an apology that, while not perfect, was enough to open a new path forward. The following autumn, Daniel was invited to host a photo exhibition titled "Rebirth After the Storm," chronicling his journey from Montana's wild mountains to the vibrant city life. At the opening, Haley stood beside him, her hand in his. They looked at each photograph together, his face alight with passion beneath Seattle's gray skies. The exhibition drew praise, and Daniel realized his pain had ultimately transformed into strength. Their story didn't end in complete harmony. His in-laws still maintained their formality, but whenever Catherine and Victor visited, they no longer tried to meddle. Occasionally, Catherine would text, "Wishing you both happiness." And in Victor's eyes, Daniel saw a new respect. "Your work is worth more than I ever imagined." Daniel and Haley smiled, knowing that sometimes happiness is born from the fiercest storms, shining brighter than ever. Daniel set an envelope on the table beside his camera. Catherine stood there, dressed elegantly, makeup flawless, still retaining the grace of a socialite in Seattle's upper circles. "Before we start shooting, Daniel," she said brightly, "I want you to see this." She paused as she opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the formal documents inside. Daniel stood quietly, noticing her trembling hands as she held the dossier. Inside were toxicology test results from Jake, a former friend who now ran a clinical psychology lab in Capitol Hill. The report read clearly, there was benzodiazepine in the glass Catherine had given Daniel on his birthday. Catherine's brow furrowed, lips quivering. How could this have happened? Her face flickered with an attempt to remain composed, but her eyes gave her away. A quiet shock rippled through Daniel, but he controlled himself, voice low and steady. "I believe you understand what happened. You intended to knock me out so that—" Haley, standing by the doorway, rushed in at that moment. She threw her arms around her husband, eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, I had no idea you could be so cruel." Daniel turned to his wife, his gaze steady. "You think you could insult my dignity as a photographer and then drug me to protect our little girl? Ridiculous." Catherine forced out an explanation. "Daniel, I only wanted you to put photography on hold and focus on something more reliable. I was afraid you'd miss out on the opportunity at the upcoming exhibition." Daniel replied coldly, "My desire for independence is not the same as yours. You want your daughter to be a prize, and if necessary, you're willing to eliminate anyone who stands in your way." Ailey's heart tightened. She wrapped her arms around her husband, then turned to her mother. "Mom, how could you?" Her voice trembled but was resolute. "How many times have I bowed to your words? Ever since Daniel and I decided to get married until now, you never accepted him. And now you think poisoning him is an expression of love?" Victor, having just returned from his office and hearing the heated argument, stepped inside looking stunned. "What's happening?" He assessed the situation quickly, then glanced at his wife. "Catherine, this is terrible. We can't go back to how things were before." Daniel, still composed, moved close to Catherine and said in a restrained tone, "This is the last thing I want to say. I will not turn my back or bow to your sick schemes. Haley and I will leave this house. Now, call someone to move our belongings out." His words rang like a hammer blow to Catherine's heart. And that second weekend, Daniel and Haley had already moved into a small apartment on the shore of Lake Union. Every morning, Daniel woke up to sunlight dancing on the water, and the sense of freedom made him feel light. Haley sat at the coffee table reading a book while Daniel prepared his camera to go photograph landscapes. On a Friday afternoon, he received an email inviting him to join the Rebirth Journey exhibition at the Seattle Art Museum. The theme focused on overcoming adversity, an opportunity Daniel had half dreamed about. He sent an invitation to Catherine and Victor, attaching a photo titled "Sunset After the Storm," showing the fiery red sky reflected on the lake's surface. The title alone hinted at his journey. Catherine read the email, her heart pounding. She forced herself not to sigh out loud, recalling the night she had deliberately drugged Daniel's drink. Tears welled in her eyes as she wondered if she could turn back time, could she undo her mistake? But her pride and shame kept her rooted to the sofa. Victor placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. "Catherine, we have to face the consequences now," he said. The opening night of the exhibition arrived, and the gallery was crowded. Daniel stood among the audience, speaking about his solo trips up Mount Rainier, the nights spent immersed in snow to capture bison lowering their heads. Every word he spoke carried the breath of his new life, no longer controlled by others' harsh judgments. At the back of the room, Catherine quietly stepped in, studying each photograph with red-rimmed eyes. When she reached "Sunset After the Storm," she froze. Memories of that birthday evening and Daniel's pained expression flooded her mind. She asked herself, "Is this remorse enough to atone for what I did?" Daniel concluded his remarks, "I dedicate this exhibition to anyone who is judged, abandoned, or feels their confidence has been shattered. In darkness, even a small ray of light can give birth to new hope." Applause erupted, and Haley smiled, her eyes filled with pride. Catherine approached, her hand trembling as she reached out. "Daniel, I want to apologize to you," she said, her voice choking. "I was wrong. I lost sight of what real love is." Daniel looked directly into his former mother-in-law's eyes, his own eyes filled with sadness but free of hatred. "You understand now. What matters is that you face it and forgive yourself." Behind them, the lights illuminated the sunset photograph, as if witnessing a new beginning. Haley squeezed Daniel's hand, then turned to her mother. "Mom, you helped shape the man he is today." Outside the window, Seattle sparkled under the night sky. Daniel and his family began to write a new chapter where love, forgiveness, and inner strength would form a solid foundation. "I will let Victor know everything," Daniel said, his gaze fixed on Catherine. "After that, both of you will have to treat me with respect, not out of sudden goodwill, but because Haley will know your true faces." Catherine let out a hollow laugh, devoid of conviction. "Victor will never trust someone like you," she muttered. Daniel snatched his camera from his shoulder and grabbed the folder bag. "That's fine. But you'll believe the laboratory report copy from Dr. Carter's lab, your prescription records, and the neighbor's accusations. Do you want to gamble your relationship with your daughter on that?" Without waiting for a response, he walked away and didn't look back. That night, after a failed photo shoot, Catherine called Haley in tears. "Daniel behaved inappropriately. He threatened me and yelled, making the shoot horrible." Hearing this, Haley rushed to her husband, tears streaming. Daniel couldn't hide his tension, so he showed her all the evidence: the toxicology report, Catherine's prescription, and the increasingly threatening text messages. Haley was silent, her eyes clouded. "Mom could never do something like this," she stammered, but her words lacked conviction. The next day, Haley went to her parents' house alone. A few hours later, she returned with red eyes and tears at her eyelids. "Dad thought it was just a misunderstanding," she said. "He believes Mom was only worried about my future." Daniel nodded quietly, as if he had anticipated this. "And you?" he asked softly. Haley turned away, avoiding her husband's gaze, clutching a pillow on the bed. "I don't know. Everything is so tangled. Do you really believe what Mom said?" Her voice broke into pieces. Over the next 2 weeks, Haley barely spoke to Daniel. She skipped meals with him, quietly returning to her parents' place. He had no choice but to throw himself into his work, staying in his studio until late at night, trying to suppress the storm inside. Until one afternoon, a package unexpectedly arrived for Daniel. There was no sender, only a scrawled note: "You need to see this." He trembled slightly as he pulled a USB drive from the envelope. A small slip of paper accompanied it. "Catherine sent me the same thing, so I covered my tracks this way. Lauren." Daniel leaned in to look at his laptop screen and opened the video files. The first clip showed footage from the security camera in Catherine and Victor's kitchen on that fateful day. He saw Catherine hiding behind the kitchen counter, carefully pouring a clear liquid into a glass, then quickly hiding it when she heard Daniel's footsteps. The next scene showed Daniel entering, picking up that glass of wine, and handing it to Victor. But the footage didn't stop there. It showed what happened after Daniel left: Catherine storming into the locked kitchen, yelling at Victor for drinking the poisoned glass. He shouted back, "This isn't the first time you did this." Their argument grew heated, with doors slamming and the heavy breathing of a weary man. Daniel watched, tears blurring his vision. It was not a one-time incident. The footage revealed that Victor was fully aware of Catherine's attempts to coerce Daniel into something terrible. The next files that came up on the screen showed footage 2 days after the birthday dinner. Catherine and Victor arguing in the living room. Victor softly repeated, "I know what you did." "So what?" But Catherine remained cold. "That was just a moment of impulse. It was to protect the family." Her voice grew hoarse. "If Haley chooses him, then she's no longer my daughter." Daniel paused the video and sighed. A wave of grief and anger swelled within him as he realized this was a systematic plan, targeting not only him, but also aiming to steal Haley's freedom. He immediately called Lauren, Owen's wife, Haley's sister-in-law. "Why did you send me this?" he asked as soon as she answered. Lauren replied in a gentle yet weary voice, "They did the same thing to me when I married Owen. Their family's law firm had no scruples. I always tried to convince Owen, but he idolizes his father and believed everything. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again to Haley." Daniel choked back his words. "They never told me about this?" Lauren sighed. "Owen had no idea. He always bowed to his father, thinking I was paranoid. I didn't tell our family because I was afraid of losing him. But now, I can't watch them torment anyone else." The next day, Daniel received a text from Victor. "Us men need to have a straightforward conversation without our wives present." He took a deep breath and replied, "I'll meet you at 2 o'clock at Rainier Golf and Country Club." At noon on Saturday, Daniel walked into the upscale club in the heart of Bellevue, carrying only his laptop and steeling himself for the confrontation. Victor was waiting in a private meeting room, his face as cold as ice. "What did you call me here for?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm. Victor stared at him for a moment before finally speaking. You know exactly what your mother has done." Daniel nodded slightly and set the USB drive on the table. "When do you plan to acknowledge it? I want to understand your motive." He watched Victor's face without blinking. Victor lowered his head. After a long pause, he said, "I believed those actions would force our daughter to choose between family and you. But perhaps I was wrong." Daniel's voice mixed anger and pity. "Things have gone far beyond any limit. Catherine didn't just attempt to harm me once. She has been destroying your daughter's life, stripped." Victor sighed, looking exhausted. "I couldn't protect her forever. I believed my mother's words too much." He glanced at a family portrait on the wall. Himself, Catherine, and Haley. "I regret it, but right now, Haley still has doubts. Are you willing to help me regain her trust?" Daniel shivered. He knew he could use the evidence to take both Victor and Catherine to court, but that would push Haley even further away. He lowered his voice. "If you want to mend things with her, you must be honest and apologize publicly to her. You must accept all the consequences." Victor nodded. "You're right. I will do whatever it takes to earn her trust back." Daniel lifted his chin, determination shining in his eyes. "Then start today. Whenever Haley is ready, let her decide on her own. Do not force her, do not deceive her, and never let this happen again." Finally, Daniel left the club with mixed feelings. His heart pounded with hate, compassion, and above all hope that one day Haley will look at him and her family with genuine trust, free of all doubt. A few weeks later, on one fateful evening, Haley came to meet Daniel by the shore of Lake Union. She gazed at the shimmering water as a summer breeze played through her hair. "You know," she began, her voice tender and somber, "ever since I discovered the truth, I've been afraid you would leave me." Daniel gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "I was worried you might push me away too. But you're here." Haley turned, tears welling in her eyes. "I realized that without you, I would lose the most important piece." She took a steadying breath, fighting back emotion. "You have two choices. Let go or keep walking forward together. I want to keep walking with you." He smiled and embraced his wife. The distant city lights reflected on the lake like a blessing, proof that a family can fracture, but love and trust can pull them back together. This section ends on an open note, showing that Daniel and Haley have surpassed the darkest point of their rupture and are slowly healing and building a solid future, while Catherine and Victor face their mistakes and learn to take responsibility. Victor sat alone in his private Bellevue clubroom, a glass of bourbon in hand as golden light filtered across his face. "Family is complicated, Daniel," he began, his tone attempting to sound conciliatory. "Haley defends you too much, but at her core she is good. Putting that medication in your glass was also out of concern for her future." Daniel sneered and looked Victor dead in the eye. "What are you saying? That such an action was somehow for the best?" Victor waved his hand as if to explain. "Catherine has been taking sedatives. She might have mixed up the glasses. Perhaps it was an accident." Suddenly, Victor's expression shifted, turning as cold as ice. "What do you want? Money? You married Haley to seize our wealth." Daniel stood up, his tone firm. "Stop interfering in her life. Stop trying to convince Haley that I'm unworthy. Let my wife and I make our own decisions." Victor leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming with malice. "You think this is the first time anyone in our family has encountered someone like you? We know how to handle people who try to take advantage of us. Haley will come back to me eventually. Ask her about Jonathan, her fiancé before you. Do you know anything about him?" Daniel felt a chill run through him. "Jonathan? She was once engaged to a plastic surgeon in Portland, a decent man. But her parents wouldn't accept him over financial matters. It took 6 months for them to persuade her to break it off." On his way home, Daniel called Rachel, Haley's college roommate at the University of Washington. "Rachel, is it true what Victor said about Haley's parents and Jonathan?" he asked. Rachel choked back sobs. "It was terrible. Jonathan truly loved Haley, but her parents planted fake evidence that he was cheating on her. I saw Haley collapse in your father's arms, crying until she was exhausted." Daniel swallowed hard. This time, the conspiracy wasn't aimed only at him. They wanted to isolate Haley from anyone who might support her independence. He resolved to gather every piece of evidence. First, he contacted Jonathan. At first, Jonathan hesitated, but after hearing Daniel's explanation, he sent over old emails between himself and Haley, in which she had poured out her honest feelings. Her parents kept sowing doubt, claiming I was deceiving her, Jonathan said, his voice weary. I tried to explain, but she didn't believe me. Everything fell apart so fast. Next, Daniel reached out to Haley's old friends, some of her high school classmates, boys who had secretly dated her. They all shared the same story. Haley's parents had pressured them to stay away. They described midnight phone calls and veiled threats. Gradually, a clear pattern emerged. Anyone encouraging Haley's independence was driven away. Samantha, Zervaz's wife and Haley's sister-in-law, sent an additional video file. Daniel learned to splice and edit it into a comprehensive dossier. In the clip, Catherine and Victor discussed their plan for Daniel and Haley. Once they divorce, we'll convince Haley to come back home, Catherine whispered. She can manage our foundation and meet a more suitable partner. Victor nodded, his face set with determination. And if necessary, we will. Daniel assembled a presentation that included security camera footage, emails, text messages, and even a midnight audio recording of Catherine berating Victor. He meticulously documented every second, every moment Catherine had trampled on her daughter's freedom. At the same time, he hosted an intimate dinner, inviting Owen and Samantha over without revealing his purpose. As they sat down to eat, Daniel connected his laptop to the living room TV. "I have something I want you to see," he announced, slowly pouring a glass of red wine. For nearly an hour, the three of them watched the videos non-stop. Owen sat motionless, his eyes hollow, lips murmuring, "Not my parents. This can't be real." Samantha wept as she watched the clip of Catherine holding the prescription dossier. "They did this to us too, Daniel," she said between sobs. When the screen went dark, Haley appeared quietly in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed. She silently took in the sight of her husband and family, her heart pounding. Owen sprang up and confronted Daniel angrily. "You edited these clips. My parents can't be this terrible." Samantha gripped Owen's arm gently. "They did it to us, Owen. Remember James, our son? They only cared when there was a grandchild." Owen's face turned as white as a sheet, stunned. I can't believe it." Haley approached the laptop and touched the screen, looking from face to face. Her husband, the man who had believed her from the start, her brother and his wife, and then her parents, those who once claimed they only wanted the best for her. She turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shook his head, pain evident in his eyes. "I needed you to see it for yourself. I didn't want you to doubt my word. I was afraid you would push me away forever if you only heard me talk." Haley was silent for a moment. Then she knelt beside the laptop, tears streaming down her face. "You did this out of love," she whispered. Owen sat down again, his shoulders shaking. "My parents, they put us in a cage." After a long moment, Haley stood and said sternly, "Mom, Dad, I have nothing more to say. I need time to think. If you truly want to help, stay out of my life for a while." Victor was flustered and tried to stop her. "Haley, don't be hasty." But she had already closed her heart. "It's too late. I need to find myself." The next afternoon, Haley, along with Owen and Samantha, packed their belongings and moved to the Capitol Hill neighborhood, somewhere she had never imagined living before, but which now gave her a sense of freedom. Her heart felt broken, but pride began to shine in her eyes. Owen leaned in close to his sister. "We'll move forward together, Haley." Daniel stood on the balcony, watching them leave, then turned to look at the sunset. Pain washed over him, but he knew this was the final turning point. A chain of injustice and lies had been laid bare. 3 months later, Haley held a small exhibition at a cafe in Capitol Hill, displaying photographs of independent life, glimpses of strangers' faces, and even a portrait of her former mother-in-law, now merely a memory. The turnout was strong, and many attendees empathized with the story behind the lens. Meanwhile, in bustling Seattle, Daniel emerged as a new man, no longer fearful, no longer doubtful. He and Haley walked hand in hand down Pike Place Market, a sea breeze swirling around them. They did not look back, for they understood, only by standing on their own can one find true happiness. This section ends with Catherine and Victor's conspiracy exposed, and Haley's first steps toward rebirth in her new environment. Healing will surely continue, as love and trust will ultimately prevail. Late that night, Haley stirred beside Daniel and whispered in his ear, "You know, I should have listened to you back then." The next morning, she gently rested her head on his shoulder and said, "I need more time to process everything, but I trust you, and I'm sorry for doubting you." The following day, Catherine called Haley and put her on speakerphone. "My dear, I think you should come back and live with us for a while. Marriage is hard, and some distance might help you gain clarity." Haley cut her off. "Mom, I've already watched the videos." Silence followed. Catherine faltered. "What videos?" Haley's voice was icy. "The ones showing you and Dad plotting to destroy my marriage, switching my husband's drink, sabotaging our relationship, and all your controlling behavior over the years?" Another moment of silence. Catherine tried to deny it. "I think he edited those videos. He's always been jealous of our family." Haley replied firmly, "No, Mom, I'm taking you to that family meeting. Owen, Samantha, Daniel, and me, so everyone can confront you." She hung up and turned to her husband. "They will deny everything, but we have the evidence. What's our plan?" For the first time in weeks, Daniel smiled. "This time, let your parents see the real us. People who not only take photos, but also know how to tell our own story." That evening, an SUV pulled up in front of Victor and Catherine's traditional style house on 112th Avenue Southeast in Bellevue. Daniel carried his camera tripod, Owen brought a platter of food, and Samantha baked an almond cake. Fully aware, this might be more of a psychological battle than a social visit. When they walked in, Victor and Catherine were already seated in the living room, their expressions a mix of confidence and arrogance. Victor nodded in greeting. "You arrived early. I thought we might have just a small misunderstanding." Daniel set up the tripod and camera in a corner, then faced his in-laws. "There's no misunderstanding. I'm recording this entire conversation for our family archive." Catherine immediately protested. "This is a private matter." Daniel cut her off. "Family matters are everyone's business, and I'm a member of this family. You've tried to cast me out before. Now I have every right to document this." Catherine, known affectionately as Kate by some, went pale, her eyes narrowing. Over the next 2 hours, Daniel presented every piece of evidence. Security footage of his mother-in-law adding a substance to his drink, photos of her overprescribed sedatives, emails Catherine sent to a psychiatrist requesting measures to keep her daughter obedient, and an audio recording of Victor and Catherine discussing how to isolate Haley from outside influences. Each time Daniel clicked to the next video clip, Catherine's face turned ashen. Victor tried to comfort her by patting her shoulder. "Catherine, maybe he edited this." Daniel spoke gravely. "These are direct exports from the security camera. Everything here is real." Haley, now comfortable using her own name, stood and addressed her parents, her voice echoing through the room. "Mom, Dad, I love you both, but what happened is unforgivable. You no longer have the right to decide my life." Owen nodded in agreement. "That's right. We're adults now. We can choose our own partners and determine our own futures." Samantha stood beside them, tears in her eyes. "They did the same to us when James was born. A grandchild meant they had me under their thumb, but the path we chose was happiness, not their tangled web." Catherine bowed her head, tears streaming, not from remorse, but because she realized she had lost control. Victor cried out, "Why are you doing this? Is there no other way?" Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. "We don't want to hold on to hatred. The point is to make you stop. If you harm anyone else, I will send all this evidence to every member of your country club, every business partner, and every social acquaintance. For the first time, Victor looked at Daniel with a mixture of respect and surprise. "I never expected you to accomplish so much." Daniel simply nodded. "You misjudged me. Now you know the consequences." 6 months later, Haley and Owen began therapy to heal the wounds their parents had inflicted. Catherine and Victor withdrew entirely, sending occasional birthday texts but respecting their children's personal space. By the end of year holiday season, the entire family received a single invitation. "You are invited to dinner. A fresh start." Haley sighed and looked at Daniel. "I want to try." He took her hand. "I'm with you." On Christmas Eve, they stepped into Victor and Catherine's warmly lit home. Catherine had decorated a Christmas tree and laid out a festive feast. Victor poured red wine, wearing a friendlier expression than before. But Daniel remained vigilant, watching closely. After dinner, Victor asked to speak with Daniel in the study. "I have a proposal for you," he said, pouring a glass of scotch, his hand trembling. "You're a talented photographer. Why not contribute to our charity? We have a fund at the Seattle Foundation that needs images to solicit donations. I'll sponsor your trip to Glacier National Park to photograph wildlife. In return, you capture warm family moments to highlight the charity's impact." Daniel took a sip of water and met Victor's gaze. "You want me to change the public's view of your family? To create beautiful images that erase the past?" Victor nodded. "Yes, we can work together. For the community's sake." Daniel offered a faint smile. "I haven't forgotten what your family did, but if you genuinely want to make amends, prove there are no hidden agendas, then we can discuss this." Victor exhaled, his lips trembling. "Give me a chance." Daniel set down his glass of scotch and refilled his water. "I'll think about it. But if I agree, everything must be completely transparent, no hiding, no lies. First, you must publicly apologize through the media." Victor was silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, I will do it." "For Haley." Daniel stood, offering a slight bow. "I'll be waiting." He left the room, leaving Victor alone in the study, surrounded by the family's trophies and certificates. Outside the door, Daniel exhaled softly. The study had felt warm but still cold. He turned to his wife. "We've reached another turning point. He has to be held accountable." Haley smiled and squeezed her husband's hand. "I know you wouldn't forgive easily, but I'm proud of you." Together, they walked back toward the party room, where laughter still floated in the air, now infused with belief in the journey they shared ahead. Victor sat in the warm office of the Bellevue Club and gently handed Daniel a glass of whiskey over ice. "Photography has been your livelihood, but have you thought about expanding?" he continued. "I could bring you into my investment firm, an associate partner role with a fast track to promotion. The salary and bonuses would be very attractive." Daniel lifted the glass, watching the ice cube swirl before setting it down untouched. "Why are you doing this?" he asked slowly. "Your family." Victor nodded, his tone soothing. "I respect the way you handled the past discomfort. You defended my daughter and stood your ground. That is what a real man does." Daniel offered a faint, reluctant smile and set the glass back on the table. "Thank you for the offer, but I don't need it." Victor's smile turned sly, his eyes lighting up. "Be reasonable. This is how we move forward. Reacting hot-headedly only breaks relationships." Daniel rose and took a step toward the door, speaking plainly. "No. You're trying to control us once again. You can't buy me off, Mr. Thompson. You can't stand that Haley loves me for who I am." Victor ground his teeth, dropping his facade. "Everyone has their price," he spat. Daniel looked Victor in the eye, his voice warm but resolute. "You're wrong, and that is why you will never understand your daughter." With that, he turned and left the office, leaving Victor standing alone as the door clicked shut. That evening, when Daniel returned to the living room, Catherine was sitting beside Haley, flipping through an old photo album. "Look at how happy you were living with your parents," she said pensively. Haley glanced at her husband, her eyes searching. Daniel only gave a slight nod, signaling that something had happened. Hearing her husband's voice, Haley stood and faced her parents. "Mom, Dad, I have good news." Everyone fell silent, their faces expectant. "We're having a baby. I'm already 3 months along." Their expressions changed immediately. Catherine rushed forward and hugged her daughter, tears welling in her eyes. Victor approached slowly, his gaze serious but awkward. "Congratulations," he said. Haley lowered her voice so only Victor could hear. "I want this child never to become a pawn in your games." Victor froze and his expression hardened, but he still offered a slight nod, as though he now understood. On the drive home, Haley squeezed her husband's hand. "They'll never change, will they?" Daniel stared at the Bellevue streets through the windshield. "Certainly not, but at least they have to accept us." 3 weeks later, Daniel received a notarized letter from Victor's law office. Inside were the deed to the house they were renting, a waterfront wood cabin on Lake Union in Seattle, and documents establishing a trust fund for their soon-to-be-born child. There was no apology, no strings attached, only a clear, irrevocable transfer of property. Daniel silently read every page. It wasn't an apology, Victor wasn't capable of that, but it was his way of acknowledging that they had lost. Still, Daniel understood that all he could accept now was Victor's unspoken admission. The following summer, they welcomed their firstborn daughter. They named her Eliza, after Daniel's grandmother. When Victor and Catherine came to the hospital, they brought small gifts and stood a respectful distance from the bed. They only leaned in to glimpse Eliza for a moment, snapped a few photos, and then left without offering child-rearing advice or discussing finances. Over the next few months, the relationship between the two families gradually returned to a state of normalcy, perhaps as normal as it could ever be. Catherine and Victor no longer tried to control Haley's life. They only occasionally sent messages to ask how she was doing. Things were not completely peaceful, but both sides had learned the importance of respecting boundaries. One autumn evening, Daniel sat in his studio editing photos, fine-tuning the color balance on an image of Lake Union at golden hour. Haley entered, carrying Eliza in her arms, her face radiant. She gently placed their daughter on Daniel's lap, then turned to her husband. "Mom called. She wants us to come to Seattle for Christmas." Daniel looked up, the computer's glow reflecting in his eyes. "Do you think we should go?" Haley smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I think so, but with conditions. We stay in a hotel, not their house. We leave whenever we want, and they never hold Eliza alone." He nodded and offered a warm smile. "That sounds reasonable. At least it shows we're not afraid." Haley sat beside him, cradling their daughter and gently bouncing the baby's legs. "You know, I used to think success meant making my parents happy, making them proud. But now I understand the greatest thing is to make myself happy, because everything else is secondary." Daniel stroked Eliza's hair, his gaze on his wife. "Live that way, and you'll never fail." Outside the window, the season's first snow began to fall, covering the tranquil lake below. Together, they looked toward the future, where family was a place of peace, not a stage for conflict, and love filled every gap and healed every wound. A week before Christmas, a large envelope from Victor arrived at their home. Inside was the company's annual report, printed in glossy letterpress, and among the report's pages were photographs Daniel had taken, a snowy shot of Mount Quinault, a portrait of a young family in Bellingham, and a piece of contemporary architecture in downtown Seattle. These were the works he had completed on his own, without any interference. Tucked into the envelope was a small note. "I hired the best photographer I know and thought you'd want a copy," Victor had written. Daniel did not call to say thank you. Both of them understood that this was not gratitude, but an unspoken recognition of their new boundaries, lines he could not cross. He didn't need his in-laws to apologize. He only needed them to acknowledge that he had succeeded on his own path, not the one they had laid out. The following March, Daniel opened his gallery New Horizon in downtown Seattle. At the grand opening, Haley stood beside him, holding Eliza on her hip. His parents flew in from Portland, and friends and clients crowded the space, praising the corners of the world he had captured over the years. Behind those images were stories of treks through North Cascades National Park snow, peaceful moments on Lake Union, and the warm smiles of children around Puget Sound. At the end of the evening, Victor and Catherine also arrived. They stayed only briefly. Catherine gently held Eliza under Haley's watchful eye, her lips curving into a small smile. Victor offered Daniel a sincere handshake and nodded approvingly. "Your photographs are exceptional," he said. They left without offering any advice on how to run the gallery. When we locked the gallery doors, Haley turned to me, her eyes still questioning. "Do you think they have changed?" I tilted my head, considering. No, but at least they've accepted that they can't control us anymore. Sometimes that's enough. That night, Haley and I sat on the wooden porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. Eliza slept soundly in her crib upstairs. The wind rustled through distant pines, carrying the low hum of a city that never truly sleeps. In that moment, I realized something I had never expressed before. I did not win by playing Victor and Catherine's game. I won because I refused to enter that game from the start. In that quiet space, I understood that true power doesn't lie in revenge, but in living fully according to one's own principles. I stood firm to protect what mattered most: my family, my passion for photography, and my freedom to live as I believed. Everything had been built on honesty and quiet persistence, without scheming or manipulation. And that, I think, is the sweetest form of revenge: living well and happily by one's own standards, surrounded by those you love. Since opening the gallery, I have become not only a respected photographer in Seattle, but also living proof that when you stand up for your values, no one can defeat you.